Good morning. 2006 Chevy Trailblazer, non-EXT, not that that'll matter to you. 4.2 liter. Came in on the hook with a problem that it wouldn't start, and it has a P2101 code, a P2119 code, and a P1682 code. And no start meaning it would not crank. The reduced power light was on because the P2119 and P2101 codes are both throttle body codes. But when you turn the key on, it wouldn't crank the starter to save its life. Now the P1682 code is an ignition B code, or second ignition code. So I went to attack that first, figuring that's probably why I couldn't get a crank out of it. And went through, obviously checked all the fuses. I found a bad relay that was engaged all the time. Once I replaced that relay, the ignition B code went away. If I jumped the starter at the fuse box with a jumper wire, the starter would engage, so I knew the starter was good. But from the key it wouldn't crank. So I hooked up the scan tool to it, and the scan tool was showing the PCM was receiving the crank request signal, but the PCM was not sending out the request to engage the relay. And the same thing with the fuel pump. It would not engage the fuel pump relay, which is why it wouldn't actually fire when I jumped the starter. So through multiple things of messing around and trying to figure out if I had a broken wire, a bad PCM, etc., I used a different scan tool, cleared the code for the throttle body, didn't back out of it, just let it say that it was cleared, and then when I tried to crank it, it would actually crank for almost a second. The codes would pop back up for the throttle body, and it would then not crank until I cleared the codes again. So when I got to it, the throttle body was basically brand new. I mean, it had shown somebody had already replaced it, and so I wasn't overly concerned about dealing with this. Also, this plug for it, somebody had completely rewired a brand new plug in it, and that's where I figured my problem was going to be. But all I wanted to do was go in under reduced power, so I wasn't working out in the dirt. And it just would not start, would not crank, nothing. And I finally turned my attention to this instead of electrical, and came in and realized that I can't move that butterfly to save my life. Turned the ignition on and put a pedal stick on the pedal, and came out to see if the motor had moved. Maybe, the motor was capable of moving this. Nothing. It was stuck. Even with it on the floor and ignition on, I couldn't force the butterflies open. So bought a new one. These are these silly ones that you can't replace the motor assembly on. Bought a new one, put it in, and voila, crank, fire, runs like a champ. So if you run into a weird set of combination codes, especially the P2101 and the P2119 in combination with each other, no crank, go straight to the throttle body and save yourself a headache.